When I was looking at law schools, I applied to a wide variety of places all over the country. I had been working at Notre Dame already within the athletic department and decided on a career change. I thought I was going to go somewhere different, see a different part of the country. But once I really dug into the Notre Dame Law School program and all of the opportunities that were available, I couldn't see myself going anywhere else. The community at Notre Dame is unlike anything I saw anywhere else. The opportunities that were available both in South Bend, in London, and around the world were just incredibly unique, and it was a choice that I'm very glad that I made. I think it's interesting how everyone accepts you as part of the Notre Dame family. You meet so many different people from so many different backgrounds, but when they have Notre Dame in common, that becomes the most important thing, and you have a starting place with them no matter where you're from. I've seen that across the country, around the world, and it's unlike any other community I've been a part of. As soon as we got there, you were connected with the London Notre Dame Club. They had events every month, and they had people to connect you with. There was a mentorship program, so you could meet London lawyers from Notre Dame, and you could talk to them about their practice and how they got there and what they were doing now. And it was really amazing to see how that transferred across the ocean. I remember sitting down to get coffee with a lawyer who went to Notre Dame, and she was living her life there and had become very successful. And it was really cool to hear how someone could take an experience like what I was doing and translate that into an international career. We figured out very quickly that law classes at Notre Dame with American professors often felt very different from classes in the UK. I remember particularly taking a class on European Union law and realizing how quickly there was so much that we did not know as Americans. That experience of seeing how an entirely different system worked, both within countries and across countries, it was just very interesting to me because you had to learn to speak differently and you had to learn the way that their system functioned. And it was so different from what we were used to, even though it was still a Western system with a lot of similarities. It was amazing to learn how different it truly was. Being in a class in London was in some ways similar to being in South Bend, but in other ways totally different. It was a much smaller group, and it was 2Ls and 3Ls, so I got to know a lot of people outside my class that I may not have in other circumstances. And because it was that group of 20 some of us in a lot of similar classes, most of us living in one building, you just got to know people in a much better way. We spent a lot of time looking at how the United Nations functions and whether or not it's effective in the way that it treats human rights around the world. And as part of that class, we went to Geneva to sit in on meetings and listen to the Human Rights Council and different groups talk. It was very clear there that we were the Americans and we had a different perspective than everyone else. But at the same time, we were in the room asking questions and getting to learn about how this functioned on a global scale. You realize how much you are a small part of a global system. And even though there are similarities and differences, there's a way that you can play a part in that. In London, I learned that you can be an American lawyer, but that doesn't mean that your scope of practice is within the United States. We live in such a global world and there's so much overlap, and whatever your specialty is, there's likelihood that you're going to intersect with different parts of the world. And whether that means being in London and working as an American lawyer, or being in the United States and working on business deals or human rights negotiations or anything, there's going to be international components to that. And the more that you can understand how other systems work and how global systems work, the more effective you're going to be no matter what your job is. You can see the roots of our legal system and where everything began. Then you also see how it's evolved in the American system. So you can see the history, you can see the roots, you can see why things evolved the way they did, but also where they became separate. And it's just a very unique experience. To this day, we have Zoom calls with our class where everyone's invited and we hear what's going on in everyone's lives. And I think those friendships are something that are a little bit different than what you're going to get on the Notre Dame campus, just because you're all in a different country, living a different experience, and it's all entirely new. So you rely on those people in a different way. I'll be working in San Francisco, and the team that I'm likely to be working on is working on renewable energy projects and contracts. So that's where I'm starting. But with the experiences that I had at Notre Dame abroad, it's been very clear to me that it's a global world and there are a lot of opportunities. With a world that's always evolving and connecting in so many different ways, I think it's inevitable that I'll probably end up somewhere that crosses those boundaries.